All right, hi again. So I'm here. We've heard many references to GenAI Commons already, and this is your chance to get a little bit more insight as to what's behind it. So this is our official mission statement. I'm not going to read it. I personally find it a bit too broad and a bit too much, a lot of buzzwords and so on. So I'd rather get into the details and give you a little bit more insight as to what we do. I do want to highlight the fact that, like a lot of efforts that are going on in open source, this very much depends on people volunteering their time. Let's just put it that way. So now, let's get concrete. So what's actually GenAI Commons doing? How are we organized? We actually have currently 3 work streams. The first one is called Models, Application, and Data. And so here we we have different activities going on. There's the Model Openness Framework, which you have heard of, and I will talk a little bit more about next, along with the Model Openness Tool. And then we have a GenAI landscape effort. So you may be familiar, this is pretty common in the LF landscape in general. Each organization, they have this landscape slide or website that you can go to that kind of creates like a picture of all the different relevant technology in their space. We are developing one specific for generative AI technologies. And then we are also working along with that on a reference architecture. It's not meant to be a standard applicable to everybody, but it's actually a way to build the landscape, because when you do a landscape, you want to organize the different technologies by theme and what they do, and so that's how we're doing it. We also have an education and outreach work stream, which focuses on developing education material. We organize webinars, we have blogs, we actually have ongoing guest speakers who come talk about different topics. And this is, we're talking about what it takes to participate. I mean, these are calls where you can just attend and listen to great speakers talking about different things like, prompt engineering, hallucination, and so on. And so we have different activities, obviously participating in events such as this one today. And then we have a work stream talking about responsible AI. And I'll talk a little bit more about this too. We have actually developed a responsible generative AI framework. And we are working now on a couple of other activities related to this in support of the RGAF. So I want to highlight the 2 main outcomes we have had to date. The first one is this Model Openness Framework. So what is it about? So you may be familiar with the concept of open washing. So essentially, you hear a lot of talk about open source models. But are they really open source? If you remember, for those who are old enough, in the beginning of open source, we saw that as well. When people started getting excited about the benefit of open source, they started developing all sorts of different licenses, a lot of which failed to really be open. And so we're seeing the same thing with models and AI in general today. So people assume that because it's on Hugging Face, you can download it, it's freely available, then it must be open source. When in fact, if you look at their licenses, a lot of them, the majority in fact, fall short of qualifying for what we would consider to be open. And so there's a lot of lack of transparency about how those models were built and so on. So the Model Openness Framework was developed to address this problem by basically providing a way to evaluate model distribution based on the concept of open science, which hinges on 2 dimensions: completeness and openness. Completeness has to do with what's included in the model distribution, what do you actually get. So often, you have the model weights is the obvious thing, but you have model architecture along with it. Does it say anything about the data that was used to train the model? Does it provide you with inference code and evaluation results, all this kind of additional information? And there are a lot of variations. So this has to do with the completeness. Next to that, there is under which license are those things made available to you? And there's a lot of confusion about what type of license is used for what type of component, because in a model distribution, you have data, code, and document. And a lot of people actually use software licenses, which are not actually appropriate for some of the model components. So this is, I invite you to go check isitopen.ai, which is a website where you can find the specification of the model openness framework, along with a link to a registry, which is online, which you can use to evaluate your own model distribution or somebody else's model distribution. There's a form, you fill out the information, and it tells you in which class of the model openness framework it falls in. The second delivery, or main delivery, is RGAF. So it's the Responsible Generative AI Framework. The idea was, well, what can we do when it comes to responsible AI? There is plenty of concerns regarding AI, right? Ethical, bias, and so on. And so we figured, well, along the same idea as the model openness framework, if we could provide the industry with a guide on how to measure whether, you know, a model or an application, an AI system is responsible or not, you know, that would be helpful. So in a way, it's trying to define or provide a standard definition of what we can call responsible generative AI. We actually identified 9 different dimensions. You see the list here. I'm not going through the list completely here, but you can see the kind of topics we have been focusing on. You know, the system needs to be helpful for humankind, right? So this is the first thing, is that it needs to be centered around the human. It needs to be accessible and inclusive. We don't want applications to be, you know, for AI to be used to segregate certain people, certain races, and so on. There is some aspect which just simply has to do with, you know, being safe, secured, and so on. Again, transparent and explainable is a very important aspect. Accountability and rectifiable is also important, and so on. So we actually published this paper earlier this year. It was published in March. There is a rather long link, but in fact, this is a link to a whole bunch of white papers that have been published in the context of ALF AI and data. I invite you to check it out. We are now going to the next stage where we're actually looking at pathways, which is essentially a way to, you know, trying to define how you actually go from those basic principles to an actual implementation. The paper is very extensive and goes into all the details of those dimensions, what concern they are really about, and what you need to take into account. And this kind of gives you a metric, you know, to actually measure if your own activities, AI-related, you know, systems are responsible, and the kind of concerns you need to take into account when you're developing an AI system or an AI application, as well as evaluating somebody else's system, right? Because we are all going to be using all sorts of systems, and we don't necessarily know how they were developed, what was taken into account or not. And of course, there's a lot of regulations around the world that are being developed in that space, and this, we hope, will also help, you know, when you're actually looking at regulation to make assessment as to whether this is compliant or not with regulations, some of which are still under development, some of which exist already, like the AI Act in Europe. So again, look at this link and it will get you to the paper. Otherwise, you know, in general, GenAI Commons has a website of its own, and there's a QR code, but the URL is pretty simple anyway, genaicommons.org. I invite you to look it up. There are links to all the different work streams and projects we have, links to the public calendar, so you can easily find us and join if you'd like. Thank you.